Hi, this is Steve Addison for the Movements Podcast, the podcast for people who want to multiply disciples and churches everywhere. And this is episode 180. Today we're talking to Guy Caskey about multiplying movements from Houston to the Horn of Africa.
Part of my story is that I came to Christ reading the New Testament, and I say that I'm one abnormally born. I really had a visitation in my bedroom, and I started, right from the very, very beginning, I had just a different perspective than someone who was culturally born in Texas, just from being born again by reading the scriptures. And I got connected to some local churches and church planting, and ended up joining a church planting team and way back in 1989 with a real desire to learn and to grow and to reach people. That was really my passion, was strong evangelism. I immediately started telling my story to people and got involved in this church plant. And it was very different than what I expected. I was very green, and it was very different than what I had been reading about. But there came a man who became my disciple. He became my spiritual father, Charles Culpepper, and he started really pouring into me and teaching me about missionaries of the past and Dawson Trotman and things about discipleship. And it's hard to explain. It just lit everything inside my heart, or a desire to multiply and reproduce disciples. And my time there led to me planting a church with a team of young people that my wife and I had led to Christ and discipled, with a vision for a network of reproducing disciples that certainly is not where we are today, but it really was the beginning of that. And it was at that church where we went to Ethiopia, and that further expanded the vision.
What happened in Ethiopia?
God really just wrecked our hearts for the nations. We just got broken for the Horn of Africa, for the nations. We saw things so differently there, and realized there was this desire to say, whatever we do here in Houston needs to be reproduced there. So if we're going to reproduce disciples there, we want to see them reproduced all the way to the sands of Somalia. And there was just a broadening in our understanding of God's heart for the nations. And I think that opened our eyes further to the needs for reproducing movement.
Okay, so if it was going to be a disciple-making movement, it had to be the same principles and practices in both the Horn of Africa and in Houston.
Yes, that's correct. And we were already had a lot of the DNA into doing a lot of it, but it just opened our eyes and stretched us even more to see the consistency in DNA here reproduced there. Okay,
so how did that play out there in Houston when you came back from the trip? What was different?
We decided to mobilize all of our house churches and cell groups with a heart for the nation. About 3/4 of our members went. We made sure that when we had a membership class, that we emphasized that membership was a commitment to discipleship. And so we taught them at that time, it was like a 3/3 process. It wasn't I don't think as effective as what we have today, but it was still a good 3/3 DNA. And so those were some of the things that we made sure that we built in to our church.
Okay, so it was a single church, but with multiple groups, discipleship groups.
That's correct. We even said that, that Sunday was a celebration or a reunion of all the churches and community groups that came together.
Okay. And what was the next step in the journey? How did you connect with No Place Left and those sorts of relationships?
Yes. And about 2011, there was just, a lot of it was just a call of God, maybe a next step to start more becoming a leader who invested in other leaders, was a part of it, even beyond a local congregation. But also there was a bandwidth issue that I was personally wrestling with our celebration, just the management of that. And because we did it every week, and there was some real concerns that it was eating up a lot of my time. I think the main thing was that it was a kind of a move and call by God. But then there were some practical things that I felt like I didn't have the time or bandwidth to preach week in and week out, to organize all kinds of staff. Even though we weren't huge, still we'd gotten up to a couple hundred people and 15 churches, community groups. It was still a lot to organize. And so I desired to be more released to multiply churches and movements at that time.
Okay. And so how did you handed the church over to other leaders?
Yes, I handed it over to 5 elders. Okay.
And then what's your life look like since? How has that worked itself out?
I invited several others. We went all the way back to Chicago. I guess, was that December? I can't remember the exact date. I think that was 2011 of December, where there was a large group that met there with Ian Kai and Steve Smith. And that's whenever I got a clearer picture of T for T. We were already using a lot of the principles that we had used for many years, Person of Peace, a lot of that. But I got a clearer picture, and I met this young man named Trey Nine, who was a local hip-hop artist who had just a desire to go after disciples and plant churches. And that led my connection with him. I started mentoring and discipling him, and that led to the network's growth and us penetrating into urban centers and hip-hop culture.
There in Houston?
That's correct, in Houston.
So you began, playing more the role of a movement catalyst, a trainer, a coach.
That's correct, yes. And I'd asked the Crossroads to send me out to start this new network and to focus on starting other networks and identifying other movement leaders.
Okay. And the two areas of focus are Houston and the Horn of Africa.
That's correct. That's correct. 2 cities. I feel like called the 2 gateway cities.
Yeah. And so tell us how it's unfolded in Houston. What does your role look like?
We now in Houston, a short time after that, Ray Vaughn came to Houston, and he and I started partnering together and praying together and talking about the vision of No Place Left. And then we have 3, and we're even starting a 4th network. So we're birthing new networks, and it's gotten to where now we're about 4 or 5 networks in the greater Houston area that are working together to accomplish and complete the No Place Left vision here. And we say we want to see reproducing churches in 165 zip codes here in the greater Houston area.
Okay. And so how do you fulfill your role then, as in those, seeking to build 4 networks across the city? What does that look like?
Well, I mean, there's certainly regular gatherings of leaders, and we even have some broader network gatherings where periodically all of our networks will come together. And my role is kind of the spiritual pops with all these guys. I'm about 20 years older than all of them. And so I kind of serve as a father. And, used to when I was younger, I'm a hyper kind of competitive guy. I wanted to do it all myself. And I'm learning to die to that and to cheer on these young guys and to do all I can to support them as they do it and celebrate that reality and fact as being known yet unknown.
Okay, well, why don't you tell us the story a bit of the hip hop brother?
Yes.
Just tell us a little bit about his ministry and what he's doing.
Yeah, so Trey Nine is a hip hop artist that just really wanted to see more than just entertainment. He got a real passion for multiplying disciples. and he was looking for someone to help him with that. Really effective evangelist, has some strong apostolic gifting as well. He's really entrepreneurial in a lot of ways. And so I started meeting with him, and one of the first things I started talking to him about is that we've got to get it beyond just the stage of presenting the gospel to where you're training every person. If people come to Christ at these events, well, then how are we going to teach them to take the gospel to their oikoses, to their networks of relationships? And I said, it has to be something simple and reproducible. And about that time, I'd been using, simple forms of gospel share like the bridge and other things like that. But when we met Ray, he introduced us to the 3 circles. And the 3 circles have been a phenomenal tool among that hip hop culture. They're very visual. And so we started training all of these artists in the 3 circles. And then they started training people when they came to Christ. They immediately started training them. And so we started seeing the gospel and gospel shares going out it was just spread like wildfire. And so these guys were no longer just sharing through hip hop, the gospel through a hip hop, but then they were teaching everyday people how to reach their families and their networks, neighborhoods, and oikoses, and what we call a ministry map. And so that really started the spread of the gospel in amazing ways.
Okay. And how did that work itself into discipleship and church formation?
Yeah, that's a good question. And then a part of that, we started working on, we'd already been using kind of some 3/3 DNA pieces, but with that, we adopted the 3/3 with its parts, and we started teaching that down. We developed a short-term discipleship set of commands with 9 different commands. And so when we'd lead someone to Christ, we'd take them through their identity, teach them that they're an ambassador, a new creation. They've got a ministry and a message. And then we started taking them through 9 story sets of what it means to be a healthy church and the commands of Christ, and started moving them towards discipleship and identifying as part of the healthy local church.
Okay. And what are you learning about sort of moving? Obviously, the gospel's getting out, but what are you learning about seeing people move into discipleship and church formation?
Well, of course, always it's not easy. Sometimes it looks a lot better on paper. Because there's a lot of difficulty and suffering, and the follow-up and follow-through is so key. And typical in urban and suburban cultures, we're so isolated and disconnected that is the hard part, is getting people to follow through. And one of the things that we are seeing happen is if we are winning people in there already a normal everyday connection in relationship, then it's a lot easier to follow through with the discipleship. And so that's been key. We've learned a lot about that. Okay.
And have you seen yet second, third generations of churches?
Yes, we have a fourth generation church that's been reproduced. And it's to say that it's super healthy is, it's just beginning. And but
is that the Corinthian church or the Galatian church? I don't know.
Probably both. Put them together.
Yes. Have you got anyone in those churches called Ananias and Sapphira?
I don't know that they're here anymore.
Yeah. So discipleship's a challenge, but you are seeing generational growth of churches.
That is correct. Yes. Slowly but surely. That one of the big things that I've struggled with here for all these years is getting pushed down here in this culture and context, 3rd to 4th generation and beyond. We've gotten a third generation multiple times here. So really since 1997 we have, with multiple leaders and huddle coaches and catalysts, but we've had a hard time getting 4th gen and beyond.
Okay. Well, most of the people listening in a Western setting right now, they're saying, tell us how you got to 3rd generation. So, because that's their challenge.
Right.
So just what have you learned about getting to that 3rd generation?
Well, I think that, one of the things that we would do is teach that first generation to be thinking about being good grandparents and how can they help their children raise good children. I mean, I've just now become a grandfather, and I want to see my children be good parents. And so one of the things that we talked about is how can you help the second generation be a good, parent to the third generation and beyond. So also thinking towards the edge has been real key, thinking towards those further generations. What do you need to do to nurture those relationships and to nurture those leaders to reproduce further and beyond?
Okay. And how many, have you got some idea of how many churches across Houston that have been started and how many have got to second or third?
Yes. I mean, we've got multiple networks going, but that hip hop network, I think, is at 12 or 13 and has two different streams that are at that third and fourth gen place in there in those 12 churches. I think it's only like 3 different streams, but 2 of them have already reached to the third generation and beyond.
Okay. And if you walked into one of those hip hop churches, have you personally visited any of them?
Oh yes. Absolutely.
What would it be like? What sort of people would be in the room?
It's very eclectic in a sense of, or very mixed as far as background, even ethnically. It's actually a beautiful picture of the mosaic of the greater Houston area. I mean, Houston is an extremely diverse city. But unfortunately, typically on Sunday morning, it's very segregated still. But if you were to go into all of these churches, you would see a different shade of color from white to black. I mean, brown in between. It's just a beautiful picture of the mosaic of the beauty of the body of Christ. That's one of the things that is really beautiful. It's very ethnically diverse.
Okay. And what sort of, are they typically young men because of that whole hip hop thing?
That's actually a really good question and insightful of you. That's been very effective at reaching men, but a lot of them also are very young, and even a lot of children. One of the strategies, the entrance strategy, is what we call events with intent. And so we do these hip hop hopes. They do the hip hop hopes. They go into an area, usually a very underserved area. Utilize hip hop, and they have an hour program where they feed, share the gospel, do hip hop, and then they begin to filter and to funnel those guys into disciple making relationships that leads to gathering in churches.
Okay. And I've got a feeling most of those guys would not, it's not as though they're going to walk into a normal church, are they?
Yeah, that's correct. A lot of them have backgrounds. They're carrying felonies. They've got gang tattoos, and a lot of them have felt rejected by most church background or Christians even.
Can you think, maybe you can change his name, but can you think of an example of someone in one of those groups whose life has been turned around?
Yeah, there's been multiple, which has led to some part of the connection. We have multiple guys who have come through the prison system, have come out, and we've trained them in the prison system. So there's a connection here. The real movement is happening in the prison systems. And we haven't even talked about that, but that's connected to this. In the last 4 months, I think we've seen over 55 churches multiplied in the prisons around the state of Texas, where it's covered more than 10% of the units. And there's a bunch of us working together on that. And so we've had guys come out of those units that are discipling, leading and help facilitating churches, that their lives have just been radically transformed. And where the areas where they were bringing destruction, they're now bringing the reconciliation of Christ, and they're able to reach guys that you and I would never be able to reach.
So tell us some more about the work in the prisons. Are you directly involved, or is that one of the leaders that you partner with?
I am directly involved, and we have a team. One of the key multipliers is a guy who was in a unit for 17 years, and Woods Edge is helping him follow up on many guys. That there was one particular unit. This is a good story that they'll have to get a picture of this. I call it the dandelion effect, kind of the Acts 8 effect. We had one unit in Texas that came under litigation because it was so hot. And we had a team in there. I mean, temperature hot, bad, inhumane type of hot. And we had a team in there that was training them. But because of the litigation, they took all of those guys and basically sent them all over the state. And this team was disappointed, just struggled, almost depressed about it. And we were like, man, what are we going to do? Well, what happened is out of that, at that time, it was very difficult for us to swallow. But then we had a guy, David Temple, with the help of Woods Edge, started following up all the guys that they were training and started planting churches in multiple units all over the state of Texas. And I'd been praying for a long time, how are we going to get the No Place Left vision to all these other regions beyond Region 3, which is kind of around the Houston area? So through that one situation where all of the guys in that unit got moved out, David and a woman named Bonnie Taylor have helped faithfully follow those guys up. And it's led to multiplication of so many different churches, and it's been exciting.
Wow. So what does a church look like in the prison system?
Well, I mean, we say that it's a gathering that's based upon Christ, that has caring leaders, that has New Testament characteristics, that has covenant, and has children. I would call that the 5 C's of healthy reproducing church. And so they can gather anytime, anywhere. Now, some units are a little more open to them gathering than others. Sometimes it makes it difficult. We also have a lot of Christian dorms in Texas. So they're dorm rooms that are faith-based. And so we have gatherings there and day rooms out in the rec, just wherever they can gather. We train them to gather, how to do the 3/3, how to be a healthy church, and how to reproduce disciples and share the gospel, and then develop leaders and just turn it loose.
Wow. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, it's amazing.
You get paid to do this? I think there's something like a million people in prison in the U.S.
Yes.
Right now. And so it's wonderful to hear that the gospel is touching the prison system.
Yes, and one of the things about the prison system is that there is that proximity catalyst there. They're daily in one another's lives. And it really, when we see the gospel and discipleship cast hold there, we've seen entire units really transform, so much so that the wardens have asked for us to come in and to begin to train and reproduce this in their unit because it lowers crime. Recidivism is helped. As so many things are, by the transforming power of the gospel, are changed in those units. And so the wardens are seeing that.
Wow. Okay, so tell us a bit. We've spent a lot of time on Houston, but you also have a heart for the Horn of Africa.
Yes.
Tell us what God's been doing alongside of the work in Houston. What's unfolded in your partnership there?
Man, the most amazing things have happened, particularly over the last 10 years. It's hard for me almost to not get emotional about it, because for years we prayed for Somalis for years. And if you've read The Insanity of God, I don't know if you have, but many probably out there have. And I partnered with the author in Addis, and he really handed off to me the vision for Somalis. And I just had a heart for Somalis and the whole Horn. And we started seeing Somalis come to Christ at first by the dozens and then the hundreds. And then we started seeing reproducing disciples in churches. And then we started seeing guys go across the border and plant and, reproducing churches in some key cities in Somalia. And I mean, that is happening, Steve, around every out of Ethiopia, every surrounding country in the Horn, and even many of the refugee camps. We're seeing the gospel being spread, leaders being developed, disciples being multiplied, and churches being multiplied in every nation around Ethiopia. That'd be northern Kenya, Somalia, Djibouti, Eritrea, North Sudan, and South Sudan. And I mean, it's been spreading like wildfire.
And typically these folk are a Muslim background?
It's Muslim background, Orthodox background, and animist. Typically are the three main backgrounds.
And are you seeing people turning and believing from each of those backgrounds?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I just got back from Orthodox background in northern Ethiopia. We've been working in the south. There's been several places where I've gone into villages and I was the only outsider ever to come in there, and entire villages have come to Christ with mosques shut down. It's been some of the most incredible stuff you've ever seen, with the most amazing stories of even signs and wonders and just God doing incredible stuff. And all this has started really with the entrance strategy of rolling out a soccer ball.
Tell us about that.
So basically, I work partner with, he's my brother. I mean, we're family. And he has been a key leader in Ethiopian football and soccer background. He was on the national team, but he also was a part of FIFA, and he helped start a kind of a nonprofit, a missions group that was using football as a strategy to build relationships in communities and share the gospel. And that started happening, and it's really spread like wildfire. I think it was 2006, 7-ish when he started it. And it is multiplied all over that nation and even Africa as a key strategy for gospel sharing. But the emphasis was gospel sharing, but this guy had a heart to see follow-up and movement happen. And he and I partner to work together to see that happen.
And so the way of connecting with a community is offering to train kids in playing soccer.
That is correct. And so they train the coaches to start out by just, building relationships with the kids. And these are in very hot, high persecutory environments. So there needs to be real wise training, but also they're very xenophobic, very don't want any outsiders. And they'll say, what are you doing here? We don't want you here. But because of the soccer piece, they're like, we like you here. We want you here. Help teach our kids the game of soccer. And as a result, it gives the coaches an opportunity to teach them about Jesus, his character, and the gospel.
Wow. And for probably most American listeners, they don't understand that soccer, or it's called football,
That's correct.
Is the world game. It is a religion.
Yes, that is correct. And so
so God's using that as an entry strategy. So for the outsider to come in and win trust, share the gospel, how does it jump then into the community where you're seeing discipleship and church formation?
Well, there's been, several different ways that this has happened, but typically we train the coaches once they start seeing the kids come to Christ, and then begin to gather them as a team, and then begin to transition the team to be church together. But then that's also spilled over into their families as well. So, and there's been several instances where, and particularly like I told you, where the entire village is converted. One happened where an imam, a key leader, Muslim leader's son, was on one of the teams, and his wife, the son's mother, had been extremely ill for years. And the coach had continued to ask the team, how can we pray? And it came up eventually. He noticed one of the boys was really sad and kept asking him about it. and it came up that his mother was ill and everything they tried, nothing had worked. Well, over a process of time, it led the coach to lead the team to go pray with the mother, and there was a manifestation of some real demonic activity when that happened, so much so that it caused such a stir in the village that the imam, the dad, was running back to the house because there was such commotion going on inside the house that he was running back with, I don't know if it was a sickle or an implement, to come back and to protect his home or whatever. When he got there, his wife had been healed and delivered. And he said, I don't know what power this is or what is happening, but I am open to hearing about this. And it eventually led to him giving his own home for the team and the church to gather in. And that led to that village being transformed by the gospel.
Wow. And so you're the outsider, and I've got a feeling you would stand out somewhere in the Horn of Africa.
Yes, sir.
So what's your role then? And, you live in Houston. So
yes.
What's your role as a partner with what God's doing then?
I just do whatever I can to help get out of the way and do all I can to pour gas on the fire, to sustain underlying works. We've given taxis, we've given coffee seeds, we've given concrete machines that have helped sustain businesses for our church planters and evangelists to be able to gather support and acceptance in communities. So we've done a lot of that. And I go around and I'm on a 1 per 5 year rotation with the guys, just because it's so dangerous, where we will go in and do trainings with the indigenous leaders. But my role is strictly behind the scenes, and it's very underground in the very places we go. And many times we travel a day and a half. Though the infrastructure's gotten a lot better, it's a brutal travel when I go.
And what's your role in terms of key leaders? How do you get alongside of them and encourage them and equip them?
Yeah, we have our key leader that works with different catalysts. So there's 11 strategic kind of areas that we work with, and they're all around the border. And so I am very close with I just consider him the Apostle Paul of Ethiopia. I mean, his story is unbelievable. And so he works with all of these other young catalysts, and I get some exposure to them, but I do all I can to support him as he is supporting them. And then the idea is raising up successors, because he's a few years older than me. And so we're trying to raise up in each of these regions apostolic leaders that are going to go after the No Place Left vision.
Wow. So you're sort of playing Barnabas to his Paul.
That's correct.
Wow.
And we've been very close since 1999. I trained some elders with him in the capital city on that first trip that I talked about that I went on. I trained some of his guys, as well as I partnered with one of the largest, missions organization. I helped, mentor and develop some of their leaders in the city, and still do to this day.
Mm. Well, it's a wonderful story, Guy, really. I just love the way that God is using, overwhelmingly the locals are winning their region of the world. But the partnership here, that we're in this together as a global body of Christ, it's wonderful.
Yes, it's a beautiful thing to be a part of. I'm very grateful to be a part of it.
What are you trusting God for in Houston and in the Horn of Africa? What is it that he's put on your heart?
One of the key things in both areas is to see, reproducing network leaders, which is a different way of thinking for me. It's probably this past year, if you were to ask me what's one of the key areas of shift in your thinking, is now I'm thinking reproducing networks. And so what I'm saying is we need multiple 120s. We need multiple upper room, experiences where networks are exploding and multiplying all over the city and all over the Horn. And with that, we also need sustainability, meaning that we need resources. And so starting Kingdom Professional businesses has been a big piece on my heart. We've been starting them in the Horn of Africa for years, but now I've even started a moving company where myself and one of the other networks work together with this moving truck to not only share the gospel, but to sustain the workers, and so that we are not, as Paul said, not depending upon anyone else, that we are working and providing out of our own means to resource the gospel and the kingdom.
Mm. And what about for Houston? Is it similar there that what you're seeing is we just need, for a city, of 6.5 million, we've got to multiply networks and streams of church planting?
That's correct. Yes. I mean, that is key. And then one of the things this coming Sunday, we will be commissioning a network out of our network, which is a huge blessing. And I don't know if, years ago I could have done, simply because of what happens is you feel like you're letting go of resources. So that's one of the things about letting go of stuff is if you have underlying resources, that you're being able to establish through business, it allows me to be a lot freer to be able to just say, well, I can release all of that because I'm not depending upon any resources from any of those churches to support me, because I have a business that's supporting me. And it's allowing me to be free to be more of a network multiplier.
Mm. So looking back to when it began in the late 80s and the journey you've been on since then, what's the one lesson that comes to mind that God has taught you that's absolutely foundational?
Man, that's a great question. But I think the key, brother, for me was when I came to Christ, I'll just be honest with you. When I came to Christ, I thought finally God had some cool people on his team. I mean, I really did think that. I thought that that most Christians were just kind of ice cream eating, coffee drinking dorks. I'm sorry, I'm not.
Yeah,
that was just my perception. And I was an athlete, a jock, a cool guy. And I just thought, man, finally God's got some cool people on his team, so we're going to see some stuff happen. So you can only imagine the kind of brokenness and smashing I've had to walk through to see some of that delivered for me, and so much stuff that I've learned. And for me, the key is guy, get out of the way. Guy, surrender. Stop making stuff happen and see where God's at work and just join him. Have the depth of character to surrender and to die moment by moment, day by day. If we're not abiding in Christ at the deepest level, and it's not powered by the Spirit, all of our tools and all of our strategy is meaningless.
Drop by movements.net for links to Guy's ministry and to plenty of other resources available for people who want to multiply disciples and churches everywhere. This has been Steve Addison for the Movements Podcast.